Anyway, I want to welcome our panel here. I'm thrilled by these panelists, and I thought I need to introduce them. The far end there is David Beattie, and over his career, David Beattie has served on 40 different boards of directors in Canada, America, Mexico, Australia, and England. He's been chair of 9 public companies. He's chaired 6 mining company boards, including Origin Mining on the ASX, Inmet Mining and Western Coal on the TSX, and he served as director of Goldcorp, Thistle Mining, Walter Energy, and Western Garnet. He was the founding managing director of the Canadian Coalition for Good Governance, an organization that represents 50 institutional investors with approximately $2 trillion in assets, none of them mine, unfortunately, under management. He's now the professor at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, where he teaches corporate strategy and corporate governance. He's the creator of the Canadian Directors Education Program, called DEP, and he remains the curriculum overseer. DEP has trained about 5,000 Canadians in partnership with 11 other Canadian universities in a rigorous 12-day course. In 2013, David was inducted into the Order of Canada, the nation's highest civil honor, and in 1994 he was made an officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace for her services to Papua New Guinea. The next panelist is Hugh DSouza. Dr. DSouza is currently Director of Geological Services and Business Development with SGS Minerals. In this role, he provides technical advice on geochemical, mineralogical, and other SGS services applied in exploration and mining. In addition, he is involved in implementation of new technologies such as the hyperspectral core scanning and laser ablation ICP-MS. He has managed SGS geochemical, mineralogical, and diamond labs for the last 20 years and has worked on the development of new mineralogical and geochemical methods for mineral exploration. Prior to that, he was with the Ontario Geological Survey and has carried out postdoctoral work at the University of New Brunswick and Geneva. He holds a BA Honours in Environmental Sciences from Lancaster, an MSc in Geochemistry from Leeds, a PhD in Isotope Geology from Edinburgh. Dan DeFrancesco is the Business Development Manager for Lockheed Martin. In his 30 years in Lockheed Martin, he's been responsible for the design, integration and testing of complex gravity gradiometer systems, instruments and systems for submarine navigation, arms control, treaty verification, and commercial mineral and hydrocarbon exploration. These roles have included serving as Chief Mechanical Engineer with responsibility for mechanical design elements, environmental analysis, system integration, field testing of systems, and customer support. Dan holds 4 U.S. patents for gravity gradiometer systems design and applications. He's authored over 30 technical peer-reviewed articles on geophysical technology. He's a member of the ASEG, EAGE, PDAC, and SEG. He's also served as the program manager and technical director for numerous government and commercial programs, and is presently the business development manager for the Lockheed Martin Gravity Business Unit located in Niagara Falls, New York. Dan also has overall responsibility for business development for Lockheed Martin's corporate interests in the broader oil and gas and mining sectors. Dan received his BSc Mechanical Engineering from LeTourneau University in 1982. Greg Palelag, next seated, is the Senior Vice President of CGG with leadership responsibilities for the multi-physics business line. He holds a Bachelor of Science honors degree in earth sciences from Carleton University and began his career with DIGEM in Mississauga, Canada, performing data processing and field project management activities on helicopter electromagnetic surveys in various countries around the world. Over the course of his 28 years of experience in the airborne geophysical industry, Mr. Paleolog has served in a progression of managerial and leadership roles with DIGEM and later with Geoterix, DIGEM, Fugro Airborne Surveys, and subsequently with CGG. CGG's multi-physics business line provides non-seismic geophysical services to the mining and oil and gas exploration sectors worldwide. Finally, by far not least, Kam McQuaid. Dr. McQuaid is the principal geoscientist at the Geoscience Centre of Excellence, BHP Billiton, Perth, Australia. Graduated with honors in geology, engineering, and fuel science from Lakehead University, followed by a PhD in geology from the University of Saskatchewan. He then enjoyed 10 years with SRK Consulting, becoming a director of the Australasian practice, focusing on exploration across all scales, project evaluation, geology, resource, and geology mining linkages. 2005, he became the inaugural director of the Centre for Exploration Targeting, CET, at the University of Western Australia, undertaking applied research with the minerals industry focused on the science of exploration targeting and building the next generation of mineral explorers. Under his leadership, the CET built a team reaching a peak of 90 staff and students and undertook $60 million of research on projects spanning 6 continents. CET research outcomes directly impacted on resource-based growth for partner companies, led to commercialization of targeting tools in leading software providers, and provided the technical basis for the formation of 2 new exploration companies. Kam was a founding member and co-author of the Uncover initiative in Australia, aimed at enabling exploration and discovery in covered terrains. In 2013, Kam was awarded the Gibb Maitland Medal from the Geological Society of Australia for contributions to Western Australian geology and mineral resource exploration. In August 2016, Kam joined BHP Billiton as the principal geoscientist in their internal Geoscience Centre of Excellence, providing expert guidance on mineral systems across all scales to help maintain and grow a high-quality resource base. Kam's career has taken him to 41 countries on 6 continents, working in a wide variety of mineral systems from Archean to Neogean in age. I'd like you to welcome our panel, please. Okay, and we're all mic'd up here, so we have to watch our language. But I'm going to start off with you, Kam. And 20 years ago, BHP had a very active R&D team tasked to develop exploration technology to find elephant ore bodies. I know from personal experience, I was involved in one of those projects and when I was in Australia, but BHP supported the development of airborne EM systems, large-scale airborne EM systems, airborne gravity gradiometer, squids, all sorts of things. They were very successful in their R&D, not necessarily that successful in discoveries. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that and comment on what BHP's attitude today is toward exploration technology. And is that attitude typical for the majors?
Yeah. No worries. I think, first of all, in terms of commenting on how the technology was applied in the past, because I wasn't part of those teams, I can't comment in detail. But what I can do is talk about my experience in working with companies that were applying those types of technologies. And I think there's a few things that it boils down to. One is that a lot of times technology has been driven, and this is symptomatic of academia as well as industry. A lot of times we're doing it because we can, rather than understanding what's exactly the problem we're trying to answer, that this technology is what we need. So it's a solution looking for a problem rather than a problem that says, okay, this is the solution we need to develop. The second thing is that a lot of the technology has gone towards, the ultimate goal is always detection of the ore body. So direct detection is often what people are looking for. And then they get anomalies, and they chase anomalies, and what they find is that they're finding a lot of false positives, and they're wasting a lot of money on false positives. And that comes down to not understanding what regional background variation is in the signal. And to me, a lot of that and I'm not a geophysicist, but to me, and talking to geophysicists, a lot of it boils down to not really understanding the petrophysics of the rocks. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done to understand the variations in the physical properties of the Earth under various environments. And that's one thing that's held us back. And I think if you look at now, BHP has, again, a very big focus on technology development. And in the exploration space, the way we're trying to do it differently now is to say, what's the geology we need to detect? And so what is it we're looking for? So we start with understanding across a range of scales that match to business decisions in exploration, what is the signal of a system? What's the signal of a fertile arc? What's the segment of the best arc segment? Then what's the segment of a camp? What's the signal of a camp? Then what's the signal of a deposit? So what do we need across all of those scales? What do we need to be able to see in the geology to tell us that that system could have been active? And then when we go through that process, we say, and that translates obviously to an area selection criteria. And then we say, okay, within that, there's a couple of questions we've found along the way that we actually don't know. And there's a lot of them, right? That we don't know about mineral systems and how they form. So that then forms a research roadmap. So your research roadmap maps directly to the problems you have in understanding and targeting and making area selection for the mineral system at various scales. And that research roadmap we break into two things. We break into what is the fundamental geoscience that we need to do, and then what is the technology, the tool. And ideally, all the fundamental geoscience initiatives should have a line of sight to eventually becoming a tool. Right? So that's how we design it now. So we're trying to be more focused on where's the best lever to pull in assigning our limited people, time, and money to develop technology. And whether it's typical of all of the industry, I don't know. Right? I do know that there are parts, taking that systematic across-scale approach has various degrees of application in industry, has various degrees of acceptance in industry, and how much each of the industry players from junior through to major focus on technology, I wouldn't be able to comment, but there's certainly some in the room that could comment on that, I'm sure.
Very good. Well, and Dan, it sort of leads into what's your perspectives in the mining industry on the acceptance of new technology from you. You've been involved in developing new technology for many years. What's your perspective on how the mining industry accepts it?
Yeah, well, thanks first of all, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I'm really out of place here. I'm an engineer. I'm an instrument designer, but I've kind of bounced around in this space for, as Chris said, about 30 years. I also spent a lot of time in the oil and gas world too, so I have kind of interesting, maybe combined perspectives on how these two industries overlap and face some of the same issues. I think I'll credit the mining industry, though, by saying I think they are more forward-leaning in regard to technology adoption and the desire to implement new and innovative solutions. And so we've done some development work over the years with BHP for one, and other companies, to develop new tools in response to a specific need. And I think that's a key point. It always needs to be need-driven. It's fun to sit in the back room and develop new toys, but if they don't have a practical application to them, it can be pretty difficult. And interestingly, I'll answer part of your question and maybe morph into a little commentary if I could. Just, we were talking earlier before the session that if you look back over the last 10 years, I mean, this conference meets every 10 years, and my assessment is that we've seen a number of evolutionary incremental changes in the way that we do things in regard to sensors or platforms or approaches or techniques or things like that. Hard to say there's been that real game changer, though. A big disruptive new technology or new approach to doing business. That's not necessarily bad, it's just an observation. And so with incremental approaches to trying to do things better, the challenge is always there to justify investment. Well, if investment in a new widget is only going to bring me 5% better performance than what I've got today, then it's harder to justify those sort of things. So obviously, the other issue is that in this world that we've been in the last number of years, exploration and research budgets have been slashed significantly. And obviously, we felt a lot of pain from that. But maybe the silver lining to that cloud is that it's helped us to be a bit more efficient and maybe focus on the important things and give attention and energy to those things that might make a difference. Which is why, I mean, we're still in the business. We're still explorers, and we're still out there trying to find things. But as I talk to many companies, and as Chris mentioned in a little bio, part of my role within our company at Lockheed Martin is to speak to the broader oil and gas and extractive industries, mining and so on, and basically listen to what their big challenges are and see if there's a way to map technology solutions to those. And I find that across the board, people are very receptive to that discussion because people are willing to share their problems and they're willing to address, the biggest needs that they have. And we've found some interesting ways to intersect solutions to that. So I think there's an appetite for it. I think it's a healthy sort of an environment in which to have that dialogue. Of course, it's constrained by dollars and it's constrained by resources. So, but I'm encouraged by the dialogue that we are able to have as potential instrument providers or solution providers to industry groups that have particular needs.
Good. Well, Greg, over the last 10 years, we've one of the things you continually hear is the exploration costs of going up and discovery rates have gone down. Majors are cutting back on exploration, cutting their exploration budgets. A lot of times exploration staff is being cut. How do you see the business today? Do you see the majors beginning to return? Do you see the juniors, the involvement of juniors increasing or decreasing? Do you see, what guideposts do you use to steer your R&D and within CGG?
Yep. Thank you, Chris, and again, thank you for inviting me on this forum. Yes, it's certainly when we look back, as Dan references this conference 10 years ago, we went through a period, 10 years ago sitting here, certainly was very active, a lot of activity, majors and juniors, to an exploration peak in expenditure 2012. And since that period, we've seen declines, very significant declines. The juniors have had largely no investment funding for the last 5 to 7 years. It's certainly a case of haves and have-nots now in investment funding, with the have-nots being much, much greater than the haves. The majors, though, we're seeing, what my perspective is, we're seeing that the majors have strong balance sheets now. They've identified the reserve depletion that's looking much more serious in the even medium term and short term. And they are starting to increase their activity. Also probably largely due to the fact that the juniors are not active. The have-nots cannot provide them a pipeline of projects. The focus is in exploring deeper and exploring undercover. And as an industry, we've performed extraordinarily poorly in that regard. There's a huge statistical gap in discoveries once you go below 200 to 250 meters. And to speak to Dan's point about acceptance of technology, in the mining industry, I think the majors, not only are they accepting of technology, they expect and they need technology to address this gap. You know, the focus forward will be on technology that can help with deeper, clearer, because it isn't just about depth, it's about clear understanding at depth, which is Kam's point about an uncertainty at depth, and sadly also cheaper, because the amount of investment that had been applied, the costs have been much higher exploring deeper, and the return on investment just has not been there. So we see trends are deeper, clearer, and cheaper, and the challenge for the industry is to find that technology that can help improve the discovery rate below.
Very good. Well, Hugh, there's been this current technology, current systems, and that we can collect huge amounts of data now, and we are collecting huge amounts of data, and many of the companies are outsourcing the interpretations to groups and consultants, and do you see that outsourcing of technical interpretation and analysis to service industries continuing, or do you see that a trend within the mining companies to bring that back in-house when they work on their data sets? So a lot of, it seems to me a lot of the, when you talk about clearer, we are collecting data, but we need the techniques and the technology and the interpretation to actually be able to do a better job understanding what the data is telling us. Do you have a comment on that first? Yes.
First of all, thank you, Chris, for inviting me to the panel. I think I'd like to answer the second part of it, the analysis part first, because I think that's where we saw a major part of the outsourcing within the industry. So if you go back over 10 years ago, you know, we saw the dominance of commercial lab sector, for example, in this outsourcing, so that by then there were very few companies that actually ran their own exploration labs. And, you know, there may be one or two that are out there, and most of these have now sort of converted into quasi-commercial operations. So that trend kind of reached its end 10 years ago. What has taken over is the service providers also running on-site labs. These are specific labs at mines and so on for specific commodities, for things like grade control. But these labs might have multiple service lines so that they're able to you know, also carry out brownfields exploration in the vicinity of the mine. So, you know, that might account for a significant amount of analysis and so on. So those two trends have kind of forced the mining companies, exploration companies, to outsource most of this analytical component, whether it's for elements or whether it's mineralogy. But I think in the last 10 years, what we saw, and you know, the last meeting we had focused on handheld XRF. That is a technology that has come to the fore, I think, over this past decade, and it's moved the analytical space back towards the companies and the geologists. I think there was significant skepticism in the industry as to whether these technologies were workable, but there were a number of industry research programs. I think Camaro is one of them that looked at the technology and found that, you know, it was something that was accurate and precise if used correctly, and I think that has led to an expansion in handheld systems like handheld XRF. I think the real underlying trend there is for data in real time, because I think that is what makes a significant impact on exploration projects. And, you know, the accusations out there is that mining ventures, exploration ventures kind of destroy value in many ways. This is certainly one way in which you can demonstrate that where time is of value, that you can output data in real time, allowing decisions to be made while drilling, in fact. So I think that's a very important trend that runs counter to the outsourcing to the labs. The other part of it, the first part in terms of technical interpretation, I see less of that. I've seen resistance or there's no real desire to have this outsourced. And I think the real reason for that is technical interpretation of data lies at the heart of the expertise and IP of mining companies. I mean, they need to immerse themselves in the data to come up with unique solutions to resolve specific exploration conundrums. And so I think, to outsource that is probably counterproductive. But where we may see a change, I think, is, get this real-time data, we may see things like artificial intelligence, machine learning coming into play. And where that technology resides is going to be a question that we're going to sort of answer, I think, in the next few years, because that sort of technology has potential to be a huge game changer in our industry, because we get data from so many different sources, and it's very difficult for specialists sometimes even to make sense of it. So these types of systems, machine learning systems, have the potential to take these from a number of different disciplines and actually make sense of that. So I see that type of technology as being one that has the greatest potential over the next few years to bring about major changes in our industry. And I take your point that most of the changes have been sort of evolutionary. There's nothing big in that, but handling multiple streams of data is one where I think will be very important for us.
Thank you. And David, I'll ask you from your perspective as chair on many mining boards. Certainly over the last few years, or the last 10 years, their exploration costs and just developing new mines and things is in fact probably not been the best financial decision that a mining company board can make. What is the attitude now, do you see, towards new exploration technology? Has it changed in the past decade? Do you think it's going to change?
Well, I think the corporate boards of directors in this industry are very chastened by the last decade. And as Dan and others have suggested, the amount of cash available for what you might call raw exploration is certainly very constrained. And I don't think that's going to change at all. But I'm quite interested in what Hugh says, because I posit that a digital tsunami has already occurred. And the physical metaphor I use is the island of La Palma in the Canaries is, according to you gentlemen, is going to fall in two. So there's going to be 300 cubic miles of material falling into the Atlantic Ocean, which will annihilate the Canary Islands, take out most of North Africa, go up through the Portugal and the English Channel, start across the Atlantic at 500 miles an hour, take out the Caribbean, and anybody living below 50 feet in the United States is going to die. And they ran a simulation of this with the Office of Emergency Preparedness in New York City, and the estimate was only 50% of the people would believe it when it's happened. So I say to boards, that's the metaphor. This digital tsunami is here. It may not have hit your shore yet, but it sure as heck hit other shores. Airbnb is the biggest hotel company in the world. It didn't exist 10 years ago. Anybody heard of Uber? It goes through industry after industry. I just came from Chicago, where I ran with McKinsey a conference on the industrial Internet of Things for industrial companies. And we had 50 CEOs from major US and global corporations there. This is already hitting them. And companies like in the mining industry, Caterpillar is spending $2 billion a year on driverless vehicles, all kinds of software in the mining industry. GE is using its Pretext platform already in a mine for Rio Tinto. So it's hitting in the mining itself, in the processing plant. I just don't think it's hit your shores yet, but when it does, it's going to be dramatic. The way in which boards deal with this is still very nascent. No one really knows. Some companies have brought younger directors on. So Walmart has 4 directors under 40. The average age of a board of directors, by the way, in the S&P 500 is 65. So they're unlikely to be the ones to gather what's going to happen when this wave hits. Other boards have set up technical committees to try, GE did that, to try to get expertise coming in. Other boards take their directors to Silicon Valley. Singtel, the giant Singapore telecommunications system, took their board away for almost a full month and explored. Others have experts in, and others have pioneered themselves in other industries. So I chair a board for Robert Friedland now, actually, that's in the high-tech industry and healthcare, going to revolutionize healthcare through the Internet of data and big technology. So it's coming. When it hits your industry, I don't know, but it will. And how you respond to it, both individually and in corporations and in board levels, I don't think anybody's got the formula for it yet, but it's going to be transformative when it arrives.
Very interesting. That's interesting. So I can see the data coming in the door. I was actually wondering whether the White House was more than 50 feet above sea level. That's my political comment for the. Okay, I'd like to open up the panel discussion, and I'd also like to involve the audience in the discussion as well. So please, if you want to say something, stick up your hand, yell, because I'm sorry we don't have mics. So the people sitting at the back should probably move forward, but you can yell. I want to talk about, I hear this debate over greenfields versus brownfields. We hear about this. But actually, if you look at if you say, okay, we're going to explore greenfields, we're going to focus on greenfields, we develop technology to see undercover, we're looking for elephants, looking for new mining camps. But it comes with a host of environmental issues, a host of negotiations, regulations. We all are aware of ore bodies that are sitting out there that probably never will be mined because of some of the issues that have to be overcome. Then there's the brownfields, which is technology. If you're in an existing mining camp, you probably have all the politics on your side because you've got a town with jobs that they rely on the mining industry. It's great to find and extend a new ore body. However, the cost of going deeper, all the infrastructure, the technology needed to see deeper, that is non-trivial, and we need to develop that technology. I'd like to hear your predictions for the upcoming decade. What role should governments fill? How are we going to handle this digital tsunami that's going to hit us, greenfields and brownfields tsunami? And how do we work with the if we're going to go into brownfields, can we work better, take the exploration into the mines? Can we do a better job than what we're doing and working with the infrastructure in the mines? So can I throw that out to you?
Can I tell you, I'd like to, in focusing on that, pick up on some points here made both by Dan and David. For me, the greenfields versus brownfields, I mean, obviously that's a huge strategy call for the major mining companies and how they put their expenditure. But on the technology side, to me, it's the same problem. Mm-hmm. Again, it's going either deeper or undercover, and as I said, the industry hasn't been very successful in providing sufficient resolution or clarity at those areas. Dan spoke well in the last decade. I mean, I think we've seen incremental advancements in all of the data collection methods. I mean, when I look at the airborne geophysical perspective, certainly the airborne EM systems have made significant advances in power and in ability to operate at low frequency, so that's giving additional depth. But again, the resolution is poor and too much uncertainty. leading to the false positives that Kam's talking about, and really the discovery rate hasn't been there. Gravity gradiometry, also, there have been incremental improvements in noise, which means, and also spatial resolution, which means it's more suitable as a direct detection technique for mining. But again, working in isolation, the discoveries aren't there. To speak to the digital revolution, I'm mindful of the keynote address given at this conference by my predecessor 10 years ago, in my role, talking about that the tools were there in airborne EM and gravity gradiometry, and what was needed was now to be able to build the workflows to create a 3D Earth model understanding to help solve the problem of resolution and clarity and uncertainty at depths. And that's what I've seen has been missing in this last 10 years, is that there hasn't been sufficient development of these workflows to take multiple parameters, combine them to create a sufficient understanding. And that's where I think the opportunity lies now. There are workflows that are being developed to invert and analyze multiple data sets, which will hopefully help to provide that resolution and clarity that can improve that discovery gap at depth. And I think that's where the adoption has to come from and the focus of development will be.
I think that's largely right. Like with greenfields or the greenfields or brownfields argument, if it's in brownfields, it has to be in a new search space, and that new search space is undercover or at depth. And I think that the key thing is as Dan was talking about, was about being need-driven. It's about know what you're looking for. And I agree totally with you, and this is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, is the integration of technologies. That, you know, a lot of the tools that are available are already pretty powerful weapons. It's about knowing what you're looking for and how you're going to use that arsenal to image that. And I think that's where a lot needs to be done. In Australia is showing, speaking as a Canadian who lives in Australia, Australia's showing some leadership in that space where they're getting government, industry, and academia together in the same room. Everyone has different agendas, service providers, everything. But they got agreement, and it took some time, and there's people in the room that can attest to that. The conversation started in 2010, in fact. And just this last August, they released the industry roadmap for mineral exploration undercover, which was what is it? And this is where industry came together with government and academia and agreed these are the things that need to happen if we're going to be better at exploring undercover. And it includes fundamental geoscience, it includes technology, it includes data management, and that's available. You can download it from the Amira website, and I encourage everyone to have a look at that. Also, they've got really good programs in where the government does co-fund industry and academia to do research, and examples would be the cooperative research programs. So the DET, Deep Exploration Technology, CRC, looking at bringing things like coil tube drilling into the minerals industry, these types of initiatives. These are things that are very hard for any company, no matter the size, to take on by themselves, but get consortia together that are specifically around a need. And the need was to be able to detect undercover cheaper, right? Drill undercover cheaper, those as examples.
I certainly agree with your points, Kam. And the government agencies, be it state or regional geoscience surveys or national interests, have to help lead this. The idea of consortia working together is really important. I think there's another element, though, and it triggered a thought as you were talking about, you know, what weapons we use. Well, I happen to work for a company that works in a different industry space primarily. So there is a lot of technology that is available in adjacent industry spaces that is readily applicable to the challenges that we face in mining. One example, a project that we're working on right now is related to laser drilling. We actually develop laser weapon systems. That's, you know, neither here nor there, but the technology's been developed for a different purpose, and the transition of it to answer a specific need in an adjacent market is something that we need to somehow facilitate, embrace, and look at some of the cross-pollination of best practices from one industry to the next. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that space.
Absolutely. A lot of times you find that somebody else has solved your problem in a different context, and we're just not aware.
Or, they've gone 80% of the way to a fieldable solution for what you need, and the incremental process to get it, right fitted for your particular need is really not so large. So I don't know how we do that, but I think that would be a really encouraging thing. I'm not just talking about defense industry, but there's a lot of great best practices in the automotive industry and in the pharmaceutical industries, and however we can leverage those things so that we can take advantage of that. And, as David mentioned, the big data issue, the tsunami of data. What if we were able to take all the data that we had and handle it and merge it and integrate it and process it in such a way that came out with a meaningful answer? Maybe that's new cloud computing solutions, maybe it's quantum computers, it's who knows what it is, but a lot of those challenges have been addressed in different industries.
Getting back to David's point about the digital stuff, the other aspect is being able to engage minds outside our industry and get them excited about it. And things like gamification of problems. And one of the best examples I saw was the program Foldit, that was put together a game that you can build complex proteins. And they'd been studying the monkey virus, which an HIV causing one, as I believe, and they'd been studying it for a decade, computer modeling it, experts working on it. They put it into Foldit, and it took something like 10 days for it to be solved, just by engaging a whole bunch of minds outside the industry. I think that for us, we're not an industry that is attractive to a large percentage of the population. We have a fairly poor brand in that sense. So getting a lot of those top minds to actually engage with our industry problems, they're not excited. But if you make a game of it,
and just to pick up on that point, I think we've seen companies like IBM have sort of natural resources divisions, and they've, made available sort of Watson to resolve problems in natural resources. Certainly, they've done that with oil and gas space, with companies like Shell, and there have been discussions with the mineral industry to try and do the same sort of thing. The issue there is. Maybe a lot of the mineral exploration projects are fairly small for a company like IBM. And what we've seen is that, these newer technologies like AI and machine learning may offer cheaper solutions than sort of throwing this problem at something like Watson. So there may be hope that we come up with potential ways, maybe using, a couple of laptops rather than arrays of multiprocessors to resolve some of these problems within exploration.
I was interested. My granddaughter, one of my granddaughters, is very, very good at Minecraft, which I always thought was just a game. There's a poster in this conference that's from Colorado School of Mines, and they're building I've got to see the poster, but they're using Minecraft. It's based on Minecraft. So they're beginning to use that. I also heard you, Hugh. I agree completely. It's the time frame is very important, because sometimes I felt in the past you could collect data and you could sit and process the data and you could think about that, and a month and a half later, you deliver the data. But I think that now we need to, especially with all this a digital tsunami implies also it's going to happen quickly. We've got to be able to react faster.
Yeah, there's a huge first mover advantage in here. And so I'd give up talking to governments. They're going to be the last people in the world to be partners with you and give you a dime. There's a lot of money out there. There's 5 big funds with over $20 billion, and last week, SoftBank just closed a $93 billion vision fund, and $20 billion of that came from Saudi Aramco. So the oil and gas industry is very deeply involved in trying to find these new technological integratives, the adjacencies, who solved the problem already in another industry. I'd abandon the calls to the government bureaucrats and move heavily towards finding out who's in SoftBank, TPG, Goldman Sachs, KKR, and get them to partner with you.
Yeah.
Where's a great resource of untapped mines? Our prison system.
And quite a few miners are there, right? Think about Bre-X. I think the metaphor of the doctors is a very interesting one because they've been trained, as you all have, to interpret the material that comes in front of you, and that's your job, and that's what you were trained to do. And so there isn't an instinct in the medical profession to pool data. David Lawrence was head of the Kaiser Foundation and became CEO of Kaiser, one of the world's largest healthcare providers. He was a pediatric asthma person. He found out that there were 18 different therapies in use amongst 20 doctors in Kaiser. It took him 15 years to get them to pool data to discern which therapies were the most effective, because each doctor was trained, and that was his profession and his pride, to analyze the things in front of him and to determine what the causation was. Today, it's down to 3, because they did agree eventually to pool, but it took him 12 years as the CEO of the company to get it pooled. Jeannie Rometty, the CEO of IBM, says it's not artificial intelligence, it's automated, augmented intelligence. And of course it's going to require human beings to integrate and understand across it. So AI looks a little scarier than I think it actually is. So humans will be definitely in the loop.
We have those pragmatic groupings too. They're called geochemists, geophysicists, structural geologists.
Occasionally talk to each other.
Yeah.
Hey, any other?
Chris, here.
Yeah, go ahead, Ted. You got to yell.
Yeah, the question was about what about a focus on technology to improve safety in the exploration industry, when safety in the mining industry is often driven by an operational focus, which has very different environment requirements than say, regional exploration. And the person speaking was from the Airborne geophysics side. I think your industry is a really good one in that clearly one of the advancements has to be UAVs. And what can we do in the future with UAV-mounted technology without sacrificing resolution, things like that. So, I mean, you probably have more insight into where you'd like to see that go as an example.
Yeah, if I could speak, I mean, I think it's interesting, actually, again, looking at that 10-year synopsis, this point in time. 10 years ago, I think there was much greater problems in our industry in safety and speaking in airborne geophysics. And a lot of it arose out of 2 things. One, at the time, the majors were talking the talk, but not walking the walk, truthfully. And the juniors, let's face it, as a junior mining and investment vehicle, there isn't an incentive for particularly being concerned about safety. The money comes in, it gets spent. If something goes wrong, there's no assets on the ground anyway. There's a very small vehicle. What I'm gratified with now is, in spite of to speak to the point, that a lot of people churned out of this industry during the downturn in majors, and they're going to add them again. But the culture, with all exploration largely being driven by majors at the present moment, the culture in the majors leadership teams is much, much better. And I think it is true, I take Ted's point, that a mine site control situation is not really appropriate or applicable to exploring off-site. But I think, for the most part, most of the major mining companies, the leadership teams understand, and they have a culture of wanting to have a proactive safety mindset. The concern for us is, if there comes a time, which probably everyone in this room hopes to see, when the investment funds open up for junior mining companies, will that culture of safety degrade very quickly as the money starts to get spent, or will we, as an industry, will we continue to advance in a responsible way to make sure that our people are well taken care of doing their work.
I mean, one thing I can say, as a representative of a major, I mean, safety's our number one priority in BHP. Well, that's better for you. Yeah, and I think I think one thing to remember is that from that safety perspective is that when the times get good, again, and there's the risk of safety slipping, one of the biggest barriers to us engaging with a really clever service provider or a clever junior miner is if they're not having a good safety record. Because at the end of the day, should we have success or should we have failure, BHP wears that consequence, and we won't risk that. So if you have a track record of being a safe junior and a safe service provider, that's actually a big barrier to entry to your competitors to work with groups like us, because that's a huge selling point to a company like us.
Well, I want to bring it back a little bit to a comment that about this money and these other funds and things. Dan, has Lockheed Martin been talked and tried to raise money from these other funding groups? And if they have, has it been successful? Do you hit very many roadblocks?
That's generally not our approach to doing business as a large,
Your government.
well, not only government, but as a publicly traded large company. I mean, there are other sources of investment. The challenge we face is just prioritizing things within the company, as most groups do. I mean, I could choose to spend money here or here, and typically companies, big extractive companies, are going to focus on their core, and the things that are a little bit outside of that are going to get less and less. So that's the reality I face. Anyway.
The reason I ask is I know that at one time you folks were trying to had a project to develop absolute gravity technology in down boreholes.
Yes.
And you were getting funding from large oil service providers.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if that was still going on within Lockheed Martin.
That's still our approach if we're developing some non-core capability, and most of the things we're talking about here are non-core to our company's interests. We have to find other ways to fund it.
Right. So, yeah, any other questions? Yes? You got to yell, so I'm sorry. And turn around so they can hear you.
I think before you worry about developing a tool for it or workflow, you have to develop the mindset first. You have to get everybody across the fact that you actually have to integrate all these things and across a whole range of scales. That's another issue.
Yeah, if I could speak just on that point, though, I think there's a good point raised in that, and it'd be interesting Cam's perspective as well. But what I see is, as I mentioned earlier, the majors, they see the need for technology to improve the success at depth. But increasingly, development is going to happen through collaborations and partnerships, because even the large major mining companies don't have sufficient internal expertise in all of the areas to make these big developments. Certainly, the service sector on its own, for the most part, doesn't have sufficient expertise. Collaborations have to be the way to go, and I believe data integration is the key thing. I'm still surprised today when I see a mining company take an Airborne EM map, maybe do an analysis or inversion, and drill off that, just one parameter. When we have so many other parameters, and the way forward is to start, tools now exist where you can start with the geology that is known at surface and do an inversion using multiple parameters with that to extend your understanding. It has to start with geology, and it ends with geology. The geophysics is just an in-between, and that's not being applied effectively enough.
Yeah, the point I wanted to make was, we face this problem further down the mining cycle in terms of mine development and mine operation, where you have geologists who speak one language, the metallurgists who speak another language, and the mining engineer speaks another language. we've developed this kind of cross-disciplinary study in geometallurgy where we're taking all of this information and weighting it, using geostatistical engines to kind of sort out what is important, but making sure that people are talking the same language and focusing on the outcomes. So I think, it's maybe in the last 10 years that we've seen geometallurgy come of age. It probably provides a good analogous way of probably applying that sort of system into early exploration. And certainly there have been attempts to use that approach to take an ore body and look at all of the different parameters and maybe find different ways of making it a viable body from a financial point of view. So I certainly think the mining industry has found answers to this. It's maybe that the technical disciplines in exploration are very, very disparate. But again, it comes down to speaking the same language.
First, I absolutely acknowledge your point about one of us should be a woman.
Perhaps more than one.
At least one of us should be a woman.
I have a twin sister.
I have a beard. I don't qualify. But and in fact, I would also think that over the last 10 years, I have seen more and more women establishing themselves in the mining industry, in the exploration industry. And I actually think that my experience is that they bring a different approach, a different way of thinking into a company, and it makes the company, generally the companies I've worked on, much stronger. And I think it can only help to improve our exploration successes, because I mean, my daughters and my wife certainly look at things differently than I look at things, and sometimes they're right. So.
Yeah. Can I speak? I'd like to comment directly on the comment and the question is interesting to me. They're both very aligned.
Yes.
In their identifying this industry, and I appreciate your commenting on it, because I also felt uncomfortable that we were all males sitting on this panel, but it speaks to the mining industry being slow in adopting not just new technology, but ways of thinking that should be the norm. And we see that in both sides. And I think to your question about why, we talk about data integration, why is it not happening? Mining companies are slow. It's correct. I see that to some degree. The talk previously, I'm not sure that the tools, while we all believed in data integration, the tools weren't sufficiently robust or advanced really to provide a good result. I think what we need to, and you ask what's going to encourage these mining companies to change? What's going to encourage, and I fundamentally believe, the mining companies in the next 10 years that do not embrace gender equality on their boards and in their teams, and do not embrace the use of data integration, those are the ones that won't find mines. The ones that do will start to see success, and that's what will drive it. And I think it's well overdue, but I think that the seeds are there now to see that movement.
To answer your question, the answer is boundary spanners. The problem is you need people that can move across all of those disciplines. They understand the problem, and they can speak to a fair depth in all of those disciplines. Those people are rare, because we don't train people that way. And some people manage to gain that experience. The idea is, how do you take there's a limited number of them, really, in my experience. How do you take someone like that in their 50s plus that have gained that experience and be able to put it in the mind of a 25-year-old? That's what you want.
Well,
and when we get there, we'll have solved the integration.
Some large companies are doing exactly that, Kam. They're taking their senior executives and they're assigning to them 20, 23-year-old recent graduates from different disciplines in a way to try to get those cross-boundary people functionally active.
So it doesn't matter what type of technology platform you make to do it. people have to have the mindset, and that spoke to the other person's question.
Way up there. I'm going to take your comment, and I'm going. One thing that I feel is a comment that was made by somebody, one of the panelists. We tend to speak different languages. Geophysicists tend to talk about conductivities, and geologists talk about rocks, and geochemists talk about some stuff that I'd never understood. and we need to learn how to make our presentations correct. And it's a little bit of segue into a workshop. It's an advertisement for a workshop that David is teaching on how to make your presentations. We can be really good geophysicists. There's a lot of really good geophysicists who get very frustrated because they can't get their message across. They don't get their message across. They might know their geophysics very well, but they're trying to present their case to somebody who really doesn't. They don't get it. They don't get the geophysics, and we need to learn how to talk to one another in clearer language. So if you pick up any sort of geologists and geophysicists, we're terrible. You pick up a paper and you read it, and it's full of language that might be good for geologists, geophysicists, but it isn't much good for convincing the guy who at the top of the mining company who's controlling the budgets. And so if you want to get your project funded, you better learn a better way to present your case. I think we should probably wrap up our panel discussion because we're going to run into our icebreaker. I thank you all very much. I thank the panelists. I think we should give them a round of applause. And I would encourage you to come to the icebreaker. There are 2 drink tickets in your delegate, so enjoy your drinks and come to our other social events during the week. There's a party on Monday night at the Hockey Hall of Fame. There's the SGS is having a lunch. There's various social events, so please come to them. Thank you.